This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life.
This tragedy began in the UK in the 1970s and 1980s when more than 30,000 people received contaminated blood and blood products from the state-funded National Health Service. This led to 3,000 deaths and infected thousands more with hepatitis or HIV. So what do we know so far?
From the National Health Service to the civil service, to ministers in successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way. They failed the victims and their families, and they failed this country.
Inquiry Chair Brian Langstaff, who led the 6-year investigation, uncovered some shocking truths. He claimed that the blood scandal was not an accident but more. Blood products, some from high-risk groups like US prisoners, were used even after the risks were known. Some victims, including children, were infected with HIV or hepatitis C. Others were used in medical trials without their knowledge or consent. Infected blood and blood products were given for transfusions, sometimes unnecessarily, and as treatments for bleeding disorders like hemophilia. Hemophiliacs received factor VIII concentrates from the US, which were particularly high risk. Despite the known dangers, authorities did not switch to safer alternatives and continued importing these products even after the risk became apparent in 1983. Systemic failures led to between 80 and 100 people becoming infected with HIV and about 26,800 contracting hepatitis C from receiving blood during childbirth or operations. Inquiry claims that doctors' complacency and slow response to the risk of AIDS made the situation worse. Adding to the horror, the then UK government had tried to hide the truth. Kenneth Clarke, who served as Health Minister under Margaret Thatcher from 1982 to 1985 and as Health Secretary from 1988 to 1990, faced strong criticism.
More than 3,000 people died without that truth. They died without an apology. They died without knowing how and why this was allowed to happen. And they died without seeing anyone held to account.
The inquiry said that the government concealed the truth to protect their reputation and cut costs. The lack of transparency and accountability made the situation even more devastating for the victims and their families. The use of infected blood has resulted in thousands of victims in the United States, France, Canada, and other countries. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak apologized to the victims, calling it a day of shame for the British state.
A wholehearted and unequivocal apology for this terrible injustice.
So what is being done now? The government has promised full compensation with plans to spend over £10 billion, that is close to $12.7 billion. An interim payment of £100,000 was made to some victims in 2022. This compensation aims to provide justice and some relief for the lives shattered by this scandal. Clive Smith from the Haemophilia Society said that this scandal challenges the trust in healthcare professionals.
For more informative videos like this, keep watching India Today News Mo.